good morning, everyone. My name is Gwen Rees. I am British Veterinary Association Junior Vice President and Lecturer in Veterinary Science at Aberystwyth University. And I'm absolutely delighted to be your chair today in this webinar where we are discussing the launch of two very important reports, both of which were released yesterday. So the first is the Veterinary Medicines Directorate's release of antibiotic use and surveillance data for food-producing animals in 2024. And the second report that we're going to look at is the RUMA Targets Task Force report, which summarises the fifth and final year of progress in this cycle of antibiotic use targets identified by the UK livestock industry's Targets Task Force 2. So the third cycle of Targets Task Force targets will be released this time next week. So tune in next week for the next cycle of targets. But the reports that we are going to be looking at today, they give us the annual update on how the UK's livestock sectors have performed on antibiotic use over 2024, and they give us a bit of an insight into the AMR surveillance work that's been going on as well. So I'm delighted to introduce our presenters today. First up, we're going to have Kitty Healy, Head of Surveillance Division and Head of AMR at the Veterinary Medicines Directorate. And we also have Catherine McLaughlin, Chair of RUMA Agriculture here. So welcome to you both. After the presentations, I will be putting some questions to both presenters. And if there is time, we may be able to answer some questions from attendees as well. So please feel free to pose any questions in the Q&A function. They'll come up, I'll be able to see those questions, and hopefully we'll have some time to address some of those as well. So just before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for their contributions to the development of both reports. Collating all this information and cohesively presenting it is no small job, and it's involved many, many stakeholders from across all sectors and industries, as well as VMD and RUMA Agriculture. It's taken a lot of hard work, time and effort, and we are really, really grateful for all of that work. A little bit of housekeeping as well before we start, just to help today's session run smoothly. Just want to go over a few practical elements before we get started. So hopefully all of your cameras and microphones should be off and muted. If not, please can you do so just so that we keep everything nice and smooth. You can see that we're running today's meeting on Teams. So both of today's speakers will shortly be sharing their screens to present their report updates. If you do have any questions, please pose them in the Q&A function, as I said. And as chair, if there's time, I'll help with coordinating these questions to the speakers. But that will be after both presentations have been completed. So the discussion will be at the end and not after each presentation. And that's just so that we don't disrupt the flow, really, of the presentation. We may not have time to answer all questions today, but if you do have any questions that you feel haven't been answered or after the webinar has finished, please contact the comms team either at the VMD or at RUMA, the email contacts of which will be shared in the Q&A function before the end of the webinar. Okay, so that's all of the housekeeping and the intro. So I'm now going to hand over to Kitty to share details about the VARSS report. Over to you, Kitty.
Thanks very much, Gwen. Right, let me share my slides. Which I know I have right here because I literally just made sure that I could share them. So if you wouldn't mind bearing with me for just a second.
Sorry.
Oh my goodness. All right. Everybody take a sip of your cups of tea.
It's always the most painful bit with Teams, isn't it? Getting the
absolutely trying to share my slides with you rather than my whole desktop. So
yes.
Right. We will be there in just a moment. Right. Okay. Hold on a second. Let me see. Right. I think I have it.
Something's coming up. Yes.
Yeah.
Just need it in slideshow mode.
I've got that in the end. There we are. Okay. Is that working on your side, Gwen?
Yeah, I can see that perfectly.
Brilliant. Okay, super. thank you very much again, and apologies for the for the classic technical hitches at the beginning. So thank you, Gwen, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming along, and I'd like to also repeat Gwen's thanks to everybody who's contributed to, from our side, to the UK VARSS report, the Veterinary Antibiotic Resistance and Sales Surveillance Report 2024, containing data from 2024, published this year in 25. It's a huge effort, huge amount of work in the VMD and in many parts of government and devolved administration. So thank you to all of you, and I'm delighted to be sharing the highlights from it today. So I'm going to do what I usually do in these presentations. I'm going to take you through the different sections of the VARSS report, and that means that we'll do it in the same order as it is in the report, and we'll start with sales, antibiotic sales and antibiotic usage data. But this time I'm starting with a slightly different slide from normal, because in this report we have introduced a new metric, and I'm going to spend a couple of slides just talking you through that, because it's important to understand what's different and what's the same, because this changes the numbers, but it doesn't change the underlying source of the data. So we are changing from what we used to have as a milligrams per kilogram metric, which is based on the old SVAC European metric, which we are now going to be calling the mgs per PCU, or mgs per population correction unit metric. So when you hear us talking about mgs per PCU, we're talking about the old one, which has been in previous VARSS report. When we talk about mgs per kg, we're now going to be talking about the one that we're introducing in this report today. And this new metric is based on a new metric that's being rolled out for European data, and we're doing this for several reasons. We're doing this because it better represents the UK data and animal populations, just as it does in the EU. It has additional categories of species for cattle laying hens and ducks, for example. And so we're able to capture some data that we weren't able to capture before. It, of course, allows regional harmonisation of monitoring data, which is something which is important. It's important for understanding not just what's going on in the UK, but what's going on contextually in our close neighbours. And also, with a slightly more global look, it's closer. It's not the same as, but it's closer to the methodology used by the World Organization for Animal Health's system in Animuse, their database. So how is it different? Well, we're still dividing the weight of antibiotics sold for the sales data, or the weight of antibiotics used in the usage data. So this metric applies to sales and usage data. But the weights, as well as some of the categories having changed, the weights that are being used for calculating the metric, so for dividing the total antibiotic weight by, have changed as well. And by and large, those weights are increasing, so that you end up in the end with a lower overall metric. So you will see that instead where we had a higher metric, in fact, let me move to my actually no, I'll wait for a second before I move to my next slide. But the take home is that while the national level and the species sector level results will look lower, they're not lower because the methodology has changed. So that's the big thing to get over. And if you want to see whether there is actually a drop in the usage, then you need to look at the trend data. And we have applied the new methodology to the trends going back. So all the data that you look at in the VARSS report, you'll be able to see the trend data with the new metric. You'll see in a couple of slides, we've also done some comparisons with the old metric for the sales data, so that you can actually see that visually. So I said that the weights are different, and this slide is really just to give you an idea so that you can see for yourselves. The weights have changed in the different, they're not the same change in weight for each species or each sector. So you can see here for pigs, we've gone from using 65 kilos as the weight the weight per animal, which is the weight at estimated weight at time of treatment, to 120 kilos, which is the weight of the animals at slaughter, and you can see that that results in a 42% reduction in the end metric. So, and you can see that this same trend is seen for other species as well, and all that this is showing you at the bottom here is where we're also we've got some refinement to the categories of species that we're including. So I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to overcomplicate it, but the bottom line is it represents the UK situation better, harmonises with Europe, better harmonised with the global situation, and look at the trend data, because the data that goes into this is the same, and we just need to gradually get used to the fact that the actual number coming out of it is going to look a little bit unfamiliar until we get used to it. Now, I said that I was going to show you some comparative data, and so here is our headline sales slide. So this shows you the trends for the total sales of antibiotics, and just as a reminder for those of you who haven't spent your heads in this in all of this data for the last few weeks, total sales of antibiotics. This is this represents the total weight of antibiotics that are sold at a pharmaceutical company level. So this is whole of the UK data, and when we've got the bar chart is showing that for food producing animals, and you can see here we've got the old metric. We've tried to color code it. The old metric is, the old metric is the blue bars, and the new metric is represented by the pink or red bars. And you can see the numbers there for the last couple of years at the top in the table, again color coded. And so you can see what I was saying. Overall, it's lower in terms of the outcome of the metric, but when we look at the trends follow the same pattern. Of course they do. It's the same data that's going into it. Now, if we look at 2024 compared to 2023, what we see is essentially no change. I mean, there's a very, very tiny change, very tiny reduction in the mgs per kg that you can see there with the population corrected trends. But in fact, if we look at some other areas of data which we can't reflect in this graph on imported data, that's actually showing a slight trend to increasing compared with previous years. So in fact, that pretty much takes out the reduction. So we're looking at overall a steady picture for antibiotic sales at the national level. Of course, there's differences in different sectors, and I'll come on to that with the usage. Now, some of you who follow the data really closely might be surprised to see a 57% reduction since 2014, since we've previously had a 59% reduction, and that is due to a correction that an error in the data which goes back many years, which we became aware of. It's in horses, so although we include it in the food producing animals, it's not in a farmed animal. So that has just made a slight adjustment to the data going all the way back, but it's a correction. It changes the figure, but it doesn't change the trend. And the last point to make on this slide is that we have the total tonnage of antibiotics sold in the UK, not corrected for population, the populations of animals in which it's used, running along the bottom there. You can see there's been a slight drop in the last year, but when we correct that for populations, as you can see from the bars, then there's no significant change. We again, though, see a 57% reduction since 2014. If we move on then to look at the sales of the highest priority critically important antibiotics, so these are the ones which are highest priority critically important for use in human medicine. So we take extra special care with those in our stewardship in animal health. You can see here that these remain really, really low at 0.6 milligrams per kilogram. Again, new metric applied to these, and that's less than 0.5%. It's 0.4% of the total antibiotic sales in food producing animals. So essentially no change since 2023 last year, and maintaining that really big 84% reduction since 2014. So this is overall a very encouraging picture on the ongoing commitment to the stewardship of these important antibiotics. So I'm going to move on to use of antibiotics and antibiotic usage by sector, so where we're reporting usage at a vet practice or a farm level. Now, we haven't done the comparison here with the old metric and the new metric because the slides will just get too busy, but you can see that if you're interested in the VARSS report and supplementary material itself. So what you're seeing here from now on is entirely new metric. So reminder, focus on the trends. Anything that says mgs per kg is new metric. So these are figures taken from the VARSS highlights report. Now you can do go and have a look at the VARSS highlights report itself. I'll talk you through these briefly. So what you're looking at here is we've got another slide with the other 4 sectors that report against antibiotic usage. We've got the sectors down on the left-hand side with their little infographics there. Then we've got the boxes with the dots in them, and so that's the uncorrected tonnage. So each dot represents 1 ton. So you can see just for the sector what tonnage of antibiotics is being used in that sector. And that's how we've ordered the sectors on these slides. Then you can see the mgs per kg use in 2024, the change since 2023, and then the really the one I guess I've been encouraging you to focus on, which is the trends over time, which is the bit on the right hand end, and then you have the percentage change that you see over that trend line. So you can see in pigs we've had a trend which has been a really good reduction, and then holding pretty steady, although we have seen a little bit of an increase in the last year, which follows on from a similar small increase the year before. So a couple of years of increases, but at a relatively modest level. And this does, I mentioned that the sales data didn't include imported antibiotics, but of course the usage data does include these imported antibiotics, and so they're not getting out of it with the usage data. On the side of the broiler, again, you can see this is significant reductions a number of years ago and being held low, staying low, and a slight reduction since last year, showing up in the current VARSS report. Then we go to game birds, and actually for game birds and for laying hens, I'll draw your attention to the fact that we have a dotted line around the 2024 and the change since 2023 boxes. That's because neither of these sectors uses the mgs per kg metric. So game birds don't correct for population, and what we have is tons of use here. So and you can see that there's been a bit of an up and down picture for usage in game birds, and we've seen an increase in the last year following on from an increase the year before. Now, of course, this does the usage is impacted by changes in the game bird population because it's not corrected for population changes, but the change in the game bird population doesn't completely account for the increase in antibiotic use over the last year, and so this is a real increase. Despite being a reduction since they started recording, as it is for all of these sectors on the slide. And then lastly, with the laying hens now, again, laying hens, as I just mentioned, don't use the mgs per kg metric. Now that in their case is because they have extremely good and detailed data, and instead use a daily bird doses per 100 bird days at risk metric, so that accounts better for the antibiotic use that they have in that sector. And you can see here essentially that they have they started low, they've got even lower, and although there's a slight increase in the last year, essentially this is from a low level to a low level. Right, so then if we move on to the second slide for usage data, looking at turkeys, salmon, trout, and ducks. Essentially, I won't spend as long on this slide. All of these are relatively low users in terms of total tonnage, as you can see here with the dots, and low users in terms of milligrams per kilogram. With turkeys, we've seen a very slight increase in the last year, but very low, keeping at low levels overall. Salmon and trout, both fish sectors have seen reductions in the last year, and salmon to an all-time low, which is great to see. I hesitate simply because, of course, it's not a race to the bottom, but it's also great to see what can be achieved in reducing the need to use antibiotics. And then in ducks, you can see there we've got a very, very slight uptick, but that's just a, again, one of these from a very low level to increasing to still a very low level. So we're not seeing any concerns there. So then on usage, let's just turn our attention to the highest priority critically important antibiotics here. So what we really see here, so again, we've ordered these in terms of total tonnage, well, kilograms used, total weight used. And we see that the highest user in terms of the weight of HPCIAs used is still the game birds, which is it's slightly concerning that since they are a relatively small sector, they are the highest using sector by volume. But nevertheless, we definitely welcome the sector's renewed efforts to make sure that these antibiotics, and I think it's fluoroquinolones that make up the HPCIA use in this sector, to make sure that they are used as a last resort with a good reason, and we do look forward to these changes being reflected in future usage data results. In trout, you can see that the trend is for it to be going down. The only HPCIA used in trout is the quinolone oxalinic acid. There are not very many antibiotics authorised for use in trout as it is, and in fact, oxalinic acid is imported as the only effective treatment for enteric red mouth. So that's the rationale behind the trout use. And then really, I think all I'll say about the pigs, laying hens, and meat poultry is it shows the results of the stewardship efforts here in keeping HPCIA use in these big sectors, keeping HPCIA use low, which is excellent. Right, okay. Now, you'll have noticed that we still, unfortunately, don't have ruminant data in our usage data, although there's been lots going on and huge efforts to improve the level of usage data from the different ruminant sectors. So this shows you an update of where we're up to at this point. So we have included dairy, cattle and sheep in the VARSS report, the data from dairy, cattle and sheep in the VARSS report, but we've included them as these figures here because it's not possible on the basis of the coverage that we have to assess trend data. And we haven't included the beef sector because of the large variety of the beef farm types within the UK, which means that it's even harder to tell whether or not that's the data that is collected is indicative of the national picture. But we're absolutely looking forward to more data coming in, and certainly even in the last year, the dairy sector has increased the coverage by 9%. So hopefully we'll have even more to report in the next report. But what we do have for dairy is sales data on intramammary, and of course, although these are sales data because they are intramammary products for dairy cows, they are reflective of use in this sector. And what you can see here is decreasing trends in dry cow tubes and lactating cow tubes, although we are seeing that the rate of reduction is somewhat slower for lactating cow tubes. Sorry, for dry cow tubes is slightly slower than for lactating cow tubes. So the dry cow tubes being the red line, and the lactating tubes being the blue line. Although we know that there is absolutely a drive within the industry to focus away from blanket dry cow therapy. So hopefully we'll be continuing to see that reduction in dry cow tube use. Companion animals, right? So with companion animals, cats and dogs, we don't have usage data per se, but in order to get trends, we look at we look at the sales data and we apply an approach called stratification. So I'm not going to go into detail here because it will take too long, but the details are all in the VARSS report. But it does help us to get an idea of the trends for overall use and the trends for HPCIA use. So overall use on the left-hand side and HPCIA use on the right-hand side. You can see that still the HPCIAs, I mean, I think that the biggest take-home message here is that you can still see that the HPCIA use in cats is significantly higher than we would like, significantly higher than dogs and higher than we would like. But we're very much supportive of the veterinary stakeholder groups who are working to improve stewardship in companion animals. We're seeing that things are gradually coming down, which definitely shows that there are changes afoot. And many of you may know that there were targets announced last week, I believe. And one of those targets is a commitment to reduce the use of HPCIA 50%. So again, we look forward to seeing those efforts coming through in the data in future years. And then the last sector I'm going to cover is horses, and we're really delighted to include in the VARSS report for the first time this year a section on antibiotic usage data from horses. The progress in this sector has really been driven by the British Equine Veterinary Association, BEVA, and their work with the Monitor Me scheme, and their work with using practice management software to extract the data, and through doing that, they've managed to cover 25% of the UK equine population. So that's a wonderful start, and we are looking forward to seeing how this expands in future years, so that we can start to get trend data and hopefully higher coverage. And on the note of coverage, this is just a sort of a representation of the level of coverage, the extent of the UK population that we're seeing covered in terms of antibiotic usage data. I don't think I will dwell on this slide because I think essentially it covers, it summarizes things that I've been saying as I've been talking throughout. Yeah, but it helps to present this in a visual way. Right, so let's move on then to the resistance data. And so I'm going to start the resistance data looking at the harmonised monitoring. So the harmonised monitoring is the part of our resistance surveillance that looks at healthy pigs and poultry. And it's also structured in such a way that the results are reflective of the full UK population. So we can apply these the results from this as applicable to the UK. So we have various outcome indicators, and this is our primary outcome indicator for the indicator bacteria E. coli. And this combines the pig results and the poultry results in a clever way so that we have a continuous, because they alternate to have pig years alternated with poultry years, but this combines all of them so that we have an indicator that represents all of the data for across the two sampling years. So our primary outcome indicator is full susceptibility. So in other words, any of the panel of antibiotics would treat the E. coli that's taken from these isolates. Over the years, we've seen an increase, and that's what we want to see with full susceptibility. But in the last year, we've seen a drop in the level of full susceptibility, even though we do have decreasing antibiotic use in the poultry sector. And perhaps to give you a little bit of additional granularity on the data behind this from the poultry year, which we've been reporting against in the VARSS report. So the poultry is made up of broilers and turkeys here, and you can see that on the full susceptibility, the primary indicator that was shown in the previous slide, we have this drop here in full susceptibility in broilers. We don't see that in turkeys, so it's the broiler data that's essentially contributing to that drop in full susceptibility in the primary indicator. And I'll look a little bit further into what's underlying that in the next slide. But before I move on, I think the other thing to note is, of course, that we're also seeing an upward trend by the looks of it in multi-drug resistance. So this is one of the secondary indicators, multi-drug resistance. So we want this to be going down, which it is by and large in the data that we have, and it is when we combine the pig and poultry data. And there's only a tiny increase here on the turkey trend, but there's still a bit of an upward trend. So it's something that we'll keep an eye on in future years. So then I promised a closer look at the broiler data, the broiler susceptibility data. And what you can see here is that there are a couple of areas where we're seeing increasing resistance trends, but we're seeing them in what we've got here. We've got ampicillin and sulfamethoxazole. So we're seeing them in first-line antibiotics. So this isn't something that we are getting alarmed about at this stage, because this is definitely reflective of the kind of antibiotics that we would be seeing, as I say, in first-line treatments. This isn't any change in the critically important antibiotics or anything like that. So this is the explanation that we have at present. As I said, it's also not driven by the usage data that we're seeing in the usage part of the report. So I think that's probably as much as we can say on it at the moment. We need to keep an eye on it. It's 1 year's result. It's not a trend. Let's see what comes up in further years. And you can see here that this is the HPCIA graph on the right hand side, and you can see that we're not. You know, things are overall in terms of trends still looking encouraging. So if we have a look at the secondary outcome indicators, I mentioned the secondary outcome indicators a couple of slides ago. So multi-drug resistance. So we're seeing that decreasing multi-drug resistant trend, despite that reduction in full susceptibility. The trends for multi-drug resistance are still on track, and we're still seeing low levels. So these here, resistance to ciprofloxacin and the ESBL AMP-C producing E. coli, we're seeing that these are still remaining low. So again, all of these again are reasons for us not being too alarmed by that change in the primary indicator. And certainly it helps to be reassuring on that. So then if we move away from those indicators and have a look at something a little different. Now we've looked at resistance, ciprofloxacin resistance to Campylobacter jejuni from broilers in the and turkeys, and we are concerned about ciprofloxacin as it is a highest priority critically important antibiotic, and it's also one which is used for the treatment of Campylobacter infections when they arise in people sometimes. And so that's why we have a look at this one. But we're bringing this up, it's not reflective of use in poultry, because we know that there's been minimal to, certainly in broilers, we're really looking at broilers here because we're not seeing a clear trend in turkeys, but we are still seeing an upward trend in ciprofloxacin resistance in Campylobacter jejuni in broilers. We know this isn't consistent. This isn't due to use in broilers, because there's been minimal to no use of ciprofloxacin in broilers over that time. And this is really as that cautionary tale that we know that sometimes when resistance arises, it doesn't go away again after we reduce the use of an antibiotic. So this is one of the reasons. This is a message to every sector, every prescription of any antibiotic, that it's so important to only use it when absolutely necessary, because just occasionally a resistance arises that hangs around whatever you do after that point. Right, so now this slide is to tell you about a new, well, it's not that new, we've been looking at it for the last 2 to 3 years, Enterococcus species. So what we're looking at here is an indicator gram-positive bacterial species. So E. coli tells us it's a good indicator for resistance in gram-negatives. Enterococcus species tell us what's going on in terms of gram-positive organisms. and so, of course, we're a bit early for trend data. We haven't got trend data to look at. We've just got some initial findings where we have found some resistance, some vancomycin resistant enterococci in broilers and turkeys, which again can't be directly attributed to can't attribute that to the use of vancomycin in broilers and turkeys because it's not used in those species, and instead it's a good example of where when we find things, it helps us to look for where the resistance has originated, and whether, and if so, what can be done to look into mitigation measures. So this is sort of for information at the moment. We look forward to having trends, and we're also doing some more investigations to see if we can identify where these have originated from. Including that One Health message that, you know, if we're seeing things that are arising in animals from non-animal sources, so for example, is it coming via wildlife or via watercourses, then it's important. It reinforces that One Health message of needing to understand transmission pathways and stop things getting into farm animals that don't originate there. And then the last surveillance update is on the clinical surveillance. So the clinical surveillance is the part of the scanning surveillance, so samples coming in submitted by vets to government labs. And one thing that we've done this year for the first time is pulled out trend data. So scanning surveillance isn't representative of the UK, so we can't say that, you know, this is the UK picture in the same way as we can for the harmonised monitoring. However, we can look at the trend data which we've got here, and you can see here for E. coli for various different species here that we are overall seeing a reduction in resistance. What you're looking at here is what we call isolates of E. coli with limited treatment options. That's a little bit like multi-drug resistance, but it's different because we use different breakpoints. We're looking at a breakpoint that's more consistent with how this could this be clinically treated or not? Could it not be clinically treated? I won't go into detail because I'm sure I'm already running over with my time. Do look in the VARSS report for further definitions if you're interested. But you can see here that the overall reductions in resistance they're kind of mirroring the picture that we're seeing in the harmonised monitoring, and this is particularly valuable to us because, of course, the harmonised monitoring only covers pigs and poultry, whereas here we have other species too, notably cattle and sheep. And then if we take a slightly more detailed look at some of this, so if we look at the E. coli isolated from pigs over time, you can also, it lets you detect areas where trends are sometimes going in the other direction from that high level. So here, for example, you can see it's a shallow slope, but you can see a trend for increasing neomycin resistance in pigs, and that does correlate with increasing aminoglycoside use in that species over the last 10 years. But you see nice reductions in trends in most of the other ones that we're seeing here. So really, we're seeing that 10 years of data is really helping us to having those trends is really helpful for being able to take that long-term view and not try and make sort of draw knee-jerk conclusions from data coming in over 1 or 2 years. And I guess that the last point to make on this slide and the others before is that, of course, these reductions in resistance, by and large, are mirroring the reductions in AMU that we saw in the first part of the presentation. And then finally, salmonella. Finally, for the purely resistance slides, salmonella. So these come from the national control program. We have therefore lots of isolates. Essentially, the main message here is that the full susceptibility, which is what we're looking at here, so the ability to treat these bugs from these isolates with any of the antibiotics in the panels tested, is going up overall in most of these groupings, except for feed. But again, that also correlates with the overall picture. So reducing AMU, increasing susceptibility, reducing resistance as an overall picture. And then that is nicely captured with this. Coming back to the indicators, we have our antimicrobial sales data from the first data slide I showed you in the blue line, and then the multi-drug resistance indicator coming down here with these bars, and that really nicely shows how the how those trends are showing the same direction of travel. So to summarize, we're showing good reductions in antibiotic use as reflected by the sales across the UK, and that's backed up by a slightly more mixed picture in usage across the different sectors, but we know that reflects the different challenges that each sector is encountering, as well as the great work and the huge energy that people are putting into making those changes. And as I've outlined, the overall picture on resistance is always complicated, but the overall picture, as I hope I've been able to show you, is encouraging. But, and I know I said this last year, this is still true, if upticks in usage become trends, then we must expect to see this reflected in the AMR levels, just as we're seeing on for the most part, Campylobacter jejuni accepted, as we're seeing resistance trends go down with trends for usage going down. And this is important because resistance ultimately is what we're trying to mitigate. We're trying to reduce as far as possible the levels of resistance, and ultimately resistance is the factor that we look at when we see whether or not how well we're when we're evaluating how well we're doing in our initiatives. And then finally, some resistance can't be very easily explained by our usage data, and so we are continuing to improve where we can the surveillance that we're doing, introducing new indicators, but also it's important that this trend of continuous improvement in surveillance is not just happening in the surveillance that we're responsible for, but also in the other sectors. So coming back to that One Health approach. And I'll leave you on the note that one of the other things that we've been doing as part of our continuous improvement is we've launched a new interactive data dashboard. So you can see there's a QR code here on the top right. Please do feel free to go and have a play. It allows users to interrogate the sales and resistance data going back to 2014 and play with some of the things like quantities of antibiotics, routes of administration, and AMR outcome indicators. And there is another QR code there to please do give us feedback on the VARSS report. We are always looking for ways to improve in all sorts of ways, and that is the end of my slide. Thank you very much.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Kitty, for that. And yeah, really exciting for metric geeks like me to see the new metric coming in for reporting. But yeah, a really important point to focus on the trends rather than the numbers as we transition between them. I'm also really excited by the new dashboard. I'm really looking forward to having a play around with that, actually, which says a lot about me, I think. Right, thank you very much. I would like to now hand the floor over to Kat McLaughlin from RUMA Agri, who is going to share details of the latest Targets Task Force report. So over to you, Kat.
Thank you, Gwen. Right, just let me get my screen up. It's loading, it's getting there.
You'll do better than me, Kat. You can't do worse than me.
Don't know, it says it's still working on it, so fingers crossed. Let me try again.
I'll let you know once I can see it on the screen.
It's saying that there's a problem, so again, much like Kitty, it worked perfectly earlier.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Teams this morning, but it's not liking sharing slides, is it? Hang on, something's happening. Aha, we have slides.
Yay, good.
I'll hand over to you then. Thanks.
Thank you. Right, so thank you, everyone. I'm here as RUMA Chair, RUMA Agriculture Chair. I'm going to just give you a run through the latest RUMA Target Task Force 2 report, the TTF2, which was released today, I think it was. and summarises the 5th year of progress against the current cycle of targets across all UK livestock sectors for data collection, use of antibiotics, uptake of preventative measures such as vaccines and training, as well as the development of industry initiatives. So this report is the last of the TTF2 cycle and marks another important and valuable phase in the livestock industry's antibiotic stewardship journey. And we'll be releasing the 3rd cycle of targets, TTF3, next week. We're now at the end of this current cycle of targets, and they have continued to build on the successful implementation of the first set of targets released back in 2017. And as we are seeing from the latest VARSS report, overall sales have reduced now by nearly 60% since 2014. RUMA is also pleased to see that data published earlier this year by the Animal Plant and Health Agency, APHA, and the VMD reveals a strong link between reduced antibiotic use and reduced antimicrobial resistance in UK animals, which is testament to the ongoing work and commitment of UK livestock sectors, who have achieved these results through continued voluntary efforts and collaboration. As we've heard from Kitty, national usage figures remain low and largely unchanged from last year, and the long-term AMR surveillance work carried out by the VMD shows multi-drug resistance in animals is at its lowest level in a decade. This is something that UK agriculture should be very proud of. I'm certainly very proud of the sectors and efforts that I've seen. What we know from both the TTF and VARSS reports is that the 2024 was yet another year of great effort and commitment from across UK livestock sectors in the responsible use of antibiotics. The total quantity of antibiotics sold for livestock remains at the lowest level to date. Whilst there is broadly a positive story to report back on, as we have heard, there are some increases in usage in some sectors, which have been the result of disease outbreaks such as avian influenza and blue tongue, vaccine shortages, ongoing impacts from Brexit, as well as environmental influences, all of which can adversely impact medicine use in many sectors. While reductions in use have been significant over the past decade, as expected, we are starting to see reduction levels stabilising for many sectors, as practices encouraging good stewardship become ever more mainstream. I make no apology for stating once again that antibiotics remain a critical tool in a vet's medicine cabinet, and even with the best husbandry standards, animals can fall ill due to disease outbreaks or as a result of environmental impacts, which can mean antibiotics are necessary at times to treat animals and prevent unnecessary suffering. There will always be challenges, but this has not deterred commitment to the TTF targets, and the sectors we represent at RUMA Agriculture have a strength, determination and resilience that we should all be incredibly proud of. A resilience that is reflected in the continued efforts and achievements, which are summarised in our latest TTF report. Some sectors have recorded their lowest use to date, while others have recorded increases in use in response to disease outbreaks, demonstrating the importance of maintaining access to antibiotics when it is appropriate to do so. All sectors continue to strive to keep antibiotics effective and fit for purpose, and only used when necessary. Of particular note, again, in this year's report is the inclusion of further Medicine Hub data, which give an indication of antibiotic use in ruminants. This is the 3rd collected dataset of antibiotic data from Medicine Hub. It's important to note that the ruminant sector is incredibly complex compared to other sectors, and designing a centralised hub to collate data is no small undertaking. These are still early data, but give an indication of antibiotic use in ruminants. We've seen a lot of collaboration promoting responsible antibiotic stewardship in the sheep, beef, dairy and calf sectors this year. The report highlights some of the initiatives and activities, and I really hope that you do go and read up on them. They've launched an antibiotic stewardship roadmap to identify how to further promote and demonstrate responsible antibiotic stewardship at UK ruminant farm level to drive progress and enhance animal health and welfare. This will also help the sector to work in partnership with other ongoing initiatives, strengthen existing activity, to co-design a unified framework for the collation and reporting of sufficient evidence of antibiotic usage at UK national level to satisfy both customers and authorities. The vets servicing the sectors are continuing with their upskilling agenda, driven through the Farm Vet Champions Network and best practice in veterinary medicines prescribing courses rolled out in vet school, so that the next generation of farm animal vets can come into the workforce informed and on point. We've got various initiatives ongoing which support health planning and surveillance, farmer training and earned recognition. All of these help to cushion the animals under our care from challenges such as disease incursions while protecting our trading reputation. The third collated data set of antibiotic use in the UK cattle and sheep sectors totals 8,878 enterprises across dairy, beef and sheep. These are still early data, but they do give an indication of antibiotic use in ruminants. At the time of the RUMA TTF report going to print, Medicine Hub drew on data from 3,205 dairy enterprises to calculate a mean usage of 13.94 mg per PCU, not a full year of data. This is comparable to the mg per PCU figure contained in the UK VARSS report, as the denominator, that's the number of adult dairy cows, and adjusted live weights used in Medicine Hub are identical. In population terms, this represents 43% of adult dairy cows in the UK. The Medicine Hub figure for HPCIA use in dairy was low at 0.01 milligrams per PCU. We had 3,367 beef enterprises, including rearing calves, to calculate a mean antibiotic usage of 1.7 milligrams per kilogram. Mean HPCIA use was 0.002 milligrams per kilogram. And a total of 2,306 sheep enterprises were submitted at the time of the RUMA TTF report going to print. Again, not a full year of data, with coverage equivalent to 10% of the UK sheep population. Mean antibiotic usage was calculated to be 6.5 mg per kg, and this differs slightly from the figures contained in the UK VARSS report. There has been ongoing and considerable progress in the sheep industry efforts towards responsible antibiotic stewardship, despite a challenging environment in 2024. The Sheep Antibiotic Guardian Group, together with the Sheep Veterinary Society, have issued clear guidance to vets to ensure appropriate prescribing takes place, particularly in the face of challenging vaccine supply, and to help in the practical outworkings of the new veterinary medicines regulations. Data to date supports that the sheep industry are a low user of antibiotics with very low HPCIA use. The key challenges of note include significant vaccine supply disruption, which continued to affect the industry during 2024, most particularly the supply of both enzootic abortion and clostridial vaccines. We had a second lambing season with Schmallenberg virus and blue tongue, and ongoing complexities with data collation. The TTF report provides lots of updates from the dairy, beef and sheep sectors, and I hope you do read through it all. The bullet points on the slide illustrate just some of the headlines achieved across these ruminant sectors. Sales of injectable, highest priority, critically important antibiotics in cattle has decreased substantially, down 83% since 2014. Health and welfare metrics indicate a reduction in clinical mastitis alongside a 98% reduction in the sales of intramammary HPCIA products since 2014. HPCIA use in sheep remains very low, below 0.05% of total use. We continue, though, to see challenges in some vaccine supplies, however, and this is a concerning issue which was discussed in depth in last week's webinar. The pig sector has continued its emphasis on responsible use rather than zero use, and animal health and welfare remain key priorities. The 2023 and 2024 antibiotic usage figures are very similar. 2024 is 1.6% higher than 2023, potentially indicating a stabilisation in usage after the rise seen between 2022 and 2023. HPCIA, particularly the AMEG category B use, remains very low, with no colistin usage in 2024. And this shows continued commitment by the pig sector to use antibiotics responsibly, even in the face of significant challenges. The health challenges that were referenced in the 2023 RUMA TTF report remain pertinent during 2024. Cases of swine dysentery, diagnosed in 2024, rose again on a number of diagnoses. The pig sector is aware of the impact of increasing swine dysentery on antibiotic usage and has formed an industry working group to address this. The problem will require a cross-sector solution, and the sector has been fortunate in working with the AMAST, that's AMR in Agri-Food Systems Transdisciplinary Network, to help achieve this. General enteric health has been less stable. The number of diagnoses of diarrhea or gastrointestinal issues as the main presenting sign was 522 in 2024 versus 399 in 2023. And that's data from the GP Pig Disease Surveillance Dashboard. Vaccine availability issues have also continued throughout 2024, impacting health management and disease prevention strategies. In 2024, the Scottish salmon farming sector continued to focus on the responsible use of antibiotics, balancing the need to protect fish health and welfare with a global aim to reduce use. Salmon farmers recorded a decrease in the volume of antibiotic used, with use the lowest since sector figures were first collated and published in 2017. 4.9 milligrams per kilogram versus a target of 5 milligrams per kilogram, which means that the sector has achieved its TTF2 target. Decreases were observed across both the freshwater and marine phases of production. Treatments are still limited to a relatively small number of farms each year, with 10.6% of freshwater farms and 7.1% of marine farms undertaking an antibiotic treatment in 2024. Use of both oxytetracycline and fluorophenical decreased in 2024. Similar to previous years, there was no use of oxalinic acid, which is defined as a higher priority antibiotic. Salmon are farmed in the wild lochs around Scotland's coastline. They're sensitive to environmental changes, which can have direct impacts on the fish, but which more often impact the development and proliferation of some of the harmful organisms that can impact fish health and welfare. Since 2022, the sector has experienced challenging conditions in the marine environment where salmon are farmed, with increased water temperatures and oceanic changes further afield. Changes in the marine environment can impact fish health, which in turn may, in some circumstances, lead to a requirement for treatment intervention. The salmon farming sector has made significant investment in new technological developments and innovation to support fish health management, e.g. increased environmental monitoring and new health interventions. For example, a recent report demonstrates nearly £1 billion investment in fish health and welfare since 2018. This has led to significant improvements in fish health and survival in 2024, which is reflected in antibiotic use. Scottish salmon farmers are proud of the progress made in 2024 and will remain vigilant by continuing to monitor their fish and the farming environment on a daily basis, promptly reacting wherever necessary and possible. The trout sector has seen antibiotic use decrease by 26% between 2023 and 2024, from 6.9 milligrams per kilogram to 5.1 milligrams per kilogram. This is the lowest figure seen since data was first published in 2017. The only HPCIA used in trout is the quinolone oxalinic acid, and its use decreased by 26%, from 1.8 mg per kg in 2023 to 1.5 mg per kg in 2024. This is also the lowest figure recorded and represents a reduction of 78% since 2017. The industry remains committed to decreasing usage, and there is no prophylactic usage of antibacterials in the sector. The trout sector is still undergoing changes with a move towards larger fish production. Through the production cycle, this means that farms buy fewer fry to grow on, stocking densities are then lower and fewer problems are seen. The extreme weather conditions remain a concern and can cause higher water temperatures, which at times can prove challenging for some farms. The sector, though, is always looking at ways of mitigating issues caused by extreme weather. Availability of vaccines in 2024 was a challenge, and this puts stock at a higher risk of disease challenges, and in some circumstances, an increased use of antibiotics. Game birds. Game birds' feed compounded with antibiotics fell approximately 25% in 2024, although this was offset by an increase in soluble use and a small increase in overall use of 5%. However, there has been a sustained shift across the sector towards more use of penicillin in the last 8 years, up by 33% in real terms, while overall antibiotic use has fallen by 48% in the same period, indicating a significant shift away from the more important antibiotic groups. Treatment with penicillin does require a much greater amount of active ingredient than some other antibiotic groups. So achieving this against the backdrop of a 48% overall reduction represents sustained progress. And remember, penicillin falls into the lowest priority group of antibiotics. Throughout the TTF2 cycle, the sector has seen volatility in antibiotic use. However, this has been mirrored to a certain extent by volatility in production levels, mainly due to COVID-19 and avian influenza. Consequently, the sector has not met the targets set for the TTF2 period on overall antibiotic use. There has been a meaningful reduction in the use of compounded in-feed antibiotics, encouraged by a growing focus on responsible prescribing practices by specialist game bird vets and bird management, such as a health risk assessment matrix for release pens. The sector remains committed to ensuring this approach to responsible prescribing is adopted across the sector. The game sector has exceeded its target for total HPCIA use by achieving a 19% reduction during the TTF2 period, and as a percentage of total use has kept below 0.5% throughout the TTF2 cycle. The sector needs more support by way of scientific research and enforcement to meet the ambitious targets set for TTF2 in the short term. Progress resulting from improved infrastructure and production release systems will be a much longer work stream. In 2024, data collected by the British Egg Industry Council, the BEIC, represented around 90% of the laying hen industry. The antibiotic use of the sector in 2024 was 0.28% bird days treated in 2024, which continues to be below the target of 1% bird days treated. During 2024, the national flock expanded by over 2 million birds once again, so this result represents a significant achievement. Since 2016, the sector has reduced its antibiotic usage in bird days treated by 58%. The industry also remains below its HPCIA usage target of 0.05% bird days. During 2024, an HPCIA was used for the first time since 2016 in a breeder laying flock, and not for birds producing eggs for the food chain. This related to a single course of treatment. BEIC only permits the use of fluoroquinolone in the treatment of significant cases of disease, where other treatments have failed to achieve the required outcome, and where the case has been reviewed and a derogation for treatment issued. The poultry meat sector has achieved remarkable reductions in antibiotic use, emphasising responsible stewardship and transparency. Total antibiotic use has decreased by 83.22% since 2012, with broiler chickens at 11.33 milligrams per PCU and turkeys at 40 milligrams per PCU in 2024. Use of HPCIA has decreased by 99.34% since 2012, prescribed only as a last resort. The sector's commitment to responsible use is reflected in ongoing monitoring and collaboration. There have been many industry initiatives that have been developed in recent years, which further demonstrate the industry's commitment to tackling AMR. All of these initiatives that you see on the screen have been generated in the last 10 years, highlighting the unity and collaboration that is embedded into the industry, in particular a commitment to data collection, training and best practice. I want to acknowledge the huge commitment that the livestock sectors have made over recent years, and that continued commitment. There is still ongoing commitment, and the industry continues to challenge itself and ask questions, which continues to drive responsible use of medicines where needed, as little as possible and as much as necessary. I really hope as we finish this round of TTF2 that everyone that's on here today does actually come and join us again next week for the launch of the TTF3 next Wednesday. I think it will be a really good session and will help to emphasise the continued commitment that the sector is showing. And that's me. Thank you. I will now stop sharing, Gwen.
Thank you so much, Kat. That was, yeah, it's really great to see all of the work that's being done. And yeah, I think it's really important, you know, that you've noted the impact that the current disease challenges that the different sectors have been facing, and also some of the issues we face with vaccine availability, and that everyone has that in mind as well. And it just goes to show that despite these challenges, we're still, you know, seeing a really positive bit of progress. So what we will do now is move on to some questions for you both. I believe that most of the questions that have come up in the Q&A have been answered by the team. So thank you very much to the team for getting through some of those. I'll come back to some in the end if we have time that have been unanswered, but I do have some questions for you both as well. So I'll start off. The details that we've heard today are largely positive, and the sales of antibiotics for use in food producing animals remains stable, which is great. But we are also seeing a bit of a mixed picture in usage trends when we look across the different sectors. And some have recorded upticks in use, as you've both kind of recognised in your presentations, with others recording their lowest use to date. Do we feel perhaps that we're now at a bit of a natural point in this process where we expect to be seeing a bit of a levelling off or a plateau in the reductions in use, because we've seen such significant reductions over the 5 to 10 years? And that's, I guess, to Kitty first and then to Kat, if that's all right.
Thanks, Gwen. I mean, yeah, it's a really good question, isn't it? And it really gets to the heart of sort of the interplay between surveillance and setting targets and doing the work. So I think that it is natural that we're seeing a levelling off in one sense, in that I think that the things that were more straightforward to do are the things that get done first, and that's absolutely natural and a normal part of the process. And then the things that are more challenging to do, or you know, when things, I mean, Kat really nicely outlined a lot of the challenges that some of the sectors are facing. When you get into that, then I think that is one reason for seeing a levelling off. But there's another question here, which is the levelling off, and I think you put this as part of your question, is the levelling off indicative of the, well, that's the level that we've reached now, and that's the level that, since we've leveled off, we should, that's it, that's where we meant to land. And I think that for that, I would say, again, I'd bring it back to the measurement and the AMR. What we need to do is the sales data and the usage data measures people's behaviour in what's being done on the ground, and prescribing behaviour and usage behaviour. But the AMR data tells us what the bacteria's response to this behaviour is. And so we have to look our data to see if this is sufficient, if we're getting the resistance low enough to keep antibiotics working in animals, and also to make sure that our public health colleagues are not concerned about the levels of AMR that we're seeing and the kinds of AMR that we're seeing in animals from a human health perspective. So I think that bringing that back round to the targets angle, we all have to, so we in government and as all the great work that Kat's been telling us about with the Targets Task Force, everything that we're doing, we have to keep on looking at all of these different threads and matching them up and making sure that that we're doing the right thing and the things that we're doing are having the effect that we want them to have. So basically, yes, we've seen some really great progress, but we should never stop looking and challenging ourselves and making sure that even when usage is low, that the usage is necessary, because even in some sectors where usage is low, that there's still room for improvement in actual stewardship. But that I really don't want that to take away from the recognition of how incredibly well all the sectors have done in achieving the reductions that we've seen in the trends that we've all been talking about. Thanks.
Thanks, Kitty. And yeah, it's kind of that continuous improvement model, isn't it? Of perhaps some of the low-hanging fruit have been picked now, but there is still nuance and nitty-gritty that we can get into with that. Kat, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, you know, I've been involved with the TTF since it first started, and I think you're right. There has been an element of, you know, low-hanging fruit was picked off first, when we always anticipated that at some point we would start to see sectors starting to level off their use of antibiotics as they start to reach that kind of sweet spot of responsible use in response to protecting animal health and welfare. I think, though, it's important to remember probably two things. Industry's efforts have never been about a race to the bottom. We've never been about achieving zero use. So we need antibiotics in our to protect animal health and welfare. So we'll all, I think, to meet that need, be an element of having to use antibiotics. I think as well, the other thing that's important is that we've never known what that quantitative level of that kind of stable spot and the sweet spot would be for each sector. So I think probably what we'll start to see is some sectors probably have reached that sweet spot, and you know there might be a few fluctuations every now and then, but I think they'll kind of, you know, generally, as I say, be stabilizing, while other sectors have still got a bit of work to do. And you know, I think that's just something that we have to take and view and assess, you know, every year and as ongoing. But I don't think there has been any loss of enthusiasm to keep doing what we're doing and to keep recognizing why we're doing this. And I think that's probably one of the main things that I would take from the results that we've seen at the minute.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's really motivating to see, isn't it, that enthusiasm is still there as we enter this kind of perhaps new phase of needing to think a little bit more about those reductions. We've, as I said, done the low-hanging fruit bit to some extent in some sectors, and it's going to be more detailed conversation from now on, but keeping that motivation that we are, you know, largely doing a brilliant job is just so important. Okay, so moving on then to the new metrics that are coming in that, Kitty, you sort of referenced at the very beginning of your presentation. So these are now being used across Europe for calculating and commenting on antibiotic use. Comparisons across countries, you know, we know that it's fraught with caveats and there are different structures, different markets, but comparisons, they're going to be made regardless, I suppose, is the point. So if the outcome of the new metric is that EU countries are going to be quoting lower figures from now on, is it important that the UK livestock sectors move to these new metrics as well? So any comparisons that are being made are at least being made on similar data? And yeah, Kitty, I would probably pose that to you first again.
Thank you. Oh gosh, so I've got so many things I want to weave into my response here, and but actually maybe if I haven't covered everything, Gwen, then do pick me up on something if I forget something. But actually, I saw that there was a question in the chat that is something that maybe this is the right time to respond to about how do we compare with other European countries. And so certainly on the basis of the data that we have at the moment, bearing in mind that we haven't yet seen the this year's most recent European report come out. I think it's due out in the next week or so. So we're comparing with slightly older data, but when we look at that, 22 out of the 29 EU and EFTA countries reported higher sales of veterinary antibiotics for food-producing animals than we did, and only 7 therefore sold less than us. Slovenia, Latvia, Luxembourg, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, and Norway. Clearly reading that not from memory. So that gives you a sort of a picture at the national sales level. I think though it's important to remember that on the national sales level, we've always said it's hard to make direct comparisons because every country has a different composition of sectors. And so, for example, we've got lots of sheep, and other countries have no sheep, and other countries have more pigs than us, or so you've seen the difference in how the metrics are calculated at that sector level, and so it gives you a bit of an idea, but it's not a, oh yes, we can directly compare these two countries. With the new metric then, so we don't yet have the usage data from the EU because with the new metric, because we're looking forward to that hopefully coming out in the new report. But what that will do is it will be applying the same methodology at a sector level as we're applying at a sector level in the VARSS report, and therefore that will be more legitimate from a methodology perspective to look across and say, well, this is the MIGs per kg usage in this UK sector, or what is it in the other other EU countries, and therefore there will be a comparison at that level, which will be interesting. I think it will be really interesting to see what's going on and where other countries are finding they're making that I don't know, they're finding it more straightforward to make reductions in use, and actually maybe there are going to be some areas where we've made more headway than others, and it's absolutely an opportunity for learning and seeing where we can learn from others, and perhaps others can learn from us. But the part of your question on should the sectors be using the new metric in the Targets task force context and at a sector level, well, from our perspective, for the VARSS report and for national trend data for sectors and for the whole country, it makes 100% sense to use something that's harmonised with other countries in the region. At a sector level, it is up to the sectors what works best for them, because ultimately we'll still have this comparison level in the VARSS report, but we absolutely wouldn't seek to dictate to the sectors what metrics to use, and ultimately it's whatever is most useful for each sector, and that may be a different decision for each sector in a tool for being able to reflect, having that, what I was talking about in my previous answer, almost that feedback loop. You decide to do something and then you measure how well that's going, and so whatever chimes best with people who are actually on the ground doing that. But I guess that I'm veering into cat's territory here.
I think you've answered it really nicely, Kitty. I don't think there's anything more I can add to that, to be honest. I think the individual sectors they are aware of the changing metrics that the VARSS and things are using. They are, I think most of them have had conversations or are ongoing with conversations about what to do, but ultimately I think you've nicely answered it.
Perfect, thank you both. Okay, so sticking with data just for a second, and then I'll ask some questions around the surveillance. So Kat, data, it remains a priority for all sectors to collect this data, and some are more advanced in this than others, I think it's fair to say. So data collection, it's been delivered voluntarily to date. And we know that with the updated veterinary medicines regulations, there is now an option to make this data collection mandatory in the future. So do you feel that the voluntary approach still has the most merit?
So, Gwen, this is a question that does come up regularly, and RUMA has not taken a position on this yet. But what I will say is the voluntary approach, done in the way that we've done it, has, I think, galvanised hearts and minds. And that positivity cannot be overlooked as a massive contributing factor to the UK's ongoing achievements. Mandating something is not always the solution to a problem. So if the government, though, through the powers of the VMR, decide to move in this direction, then we need to determine the what's and whys. And by that, I'm saying what data is actually needed, why is it required, i.e. what question is it answering? And importantly, we need to understand who would own the data and what can be done with it. The last thing that we, and by we, I'm talking about industry, the sectors, government, taxpayers, the last thing that we need is to create an overly burdensome, expensive reporting and collection system, which loses that goodwill and just creates duplication of effort and concern. It's also worth reminding the audience today that RUMA targets are all and have always been about meeting a very specific need, and that's been to reduce, refine and replace antibiotic use so that we minimise the risk of resistance developing in those antibiotics which are vital to both animals and humans. So I think, as I say, it comes back to, obviously the industry will do what it's asked to do. If government decide to mandate, we will respond to that intention. But we just need to be very clear what question is being asked, so that we make sure we get the right answer.
Absolutely, and I think human behaviour change is one of my areas that I'm really interested in, and the fact that everyone in industry has had agency in this and has been able to take ownership of it has been so important and is reflected in what has happened to date, isn't it? But as you say, we'll see what happens with this. Kitty, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that before we move on to a surveillance question?
Thank you. Yeah, just a little bit, and I'll try not to overlap too much with what Kat said. But I think it's, and I agree with much of what you said, Kat. I mean, I think bottom line, I think hopefully you've seen from the presentations today how valuable the data on antibiotic usage is. I mean, it tells us where we're doing well and where we could improve a bit. It gives us all sorts of information, and hopefully that information is also useful. I mean, for it to work properly, that information should be useful to the people collecting it, reporting it, for the people up the food processing chain at the sector level, at the national level. That's why the voluntary way we've done things so far has worked so well, because as you said, you just expressed it then, Gwen, saying that everybody's had agency in developing the system that actually does work for them, and that has to be the way to go for a successful system. We don't have any easy answers. I don't think there is an easy answer to your actual question, which one is better, or should we be doing one or the other? But actually, one of the things we're doing at the moment is doing a piece of work to talking to people in the UK, but also to colleagues in other countries where different approaches have been taken, including mandatory approaches, so that we can learn what's worked and what hasn't worked, and what might therefore be likely to work or not work in the UK situation. So it's an area that we're very actively looking into, so that we can try and keep that collaboration, but at the same time keep that drive, however that might look, to get the data that we need to support the whole picture. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you very much. So it's another question for you, largely Kitty, around surveillance for AMR. So key indicators for antimicrobial resistance show an overall really encouraging picture, which was really nice to see, with the long-term trends showing resistance is reducing, which is a good news story. So can livestock producers celebrate now the fact that what they're doing is saving the lives of animals and people, and that we can confidently make this direct link here between the work that's been going on that we've seen showcased and the impact of what the science is telling us.
So, I mean, basically, I think yes, I think we can. I mean, I know we're always slightly cagey about it. I mean, and we can't. How can we prove it? But the circumstantial evidence is all over the results that we're seeing, and I think that the work that the teams who've been generating and interpreting and putting up the data on the clinical surveillance this year have, as we've seen with the clinical surveillance E. coli long-term trends in different species, have shown. I mean, that only adds to the confidence that we have. So, I mean. I'm gonna speak from a policy perspective rather than a pure science perspective. But yes, I think everybody who's been involved can be really proud of this, and it's a fantastic outcome and trends to be really proud of.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kitty. I think that's a really nice note for us to finish the Q&A on. I've just noticed the time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap us up now, but thank you both very much for your presentations and participation in the Q&A. So yeah, thank you. I want to thank everyone who has taken part today, to our speakers, and to everyone who's attended and those that have asked questions in the chat. I think we have actually managed to answer all of those now, which is great. So both of these important industry reports demonstrate another year of really great effort and commitment from across the UK livestock sectors in the responsible use of antibiotics. As we've heard, national usage figures remain stable and largely unchanged from last year, and the long-term AMR surveillance work carried out by the VMD shows a really encouraging picture. And this is something to be proud of, and these latest results should give everyone the ongoing confidence and focus to build on what's already been done and to be ambitious, really, and as ambitious as possible as we drive forward with efforts to continue to tackle AMR and protect the efficacy of antibiotics, because we all have this common goal of helping to save the lives of animals and humans, and it's great to actually hear that we are doing that. So before we finish, just a reminder that RUMA Agriculture will be launching the third cycle of the Targets Task Force this time next week at another webinar, so please tune in this time next week. The details of how to book have been added to the meeting Q&A, I believe, and so RUMA Agriculture will also be sending out a booking link to all of you who have attended today, and we would love to see you at the same time next week for that. Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up now, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, and we will see you next week.